A devastating car accident leads to a wrongful death action. Fortunately, the family had underinsured motorist insurance. Stay tuned to find out what that is. Shane Smith here from Shane Smith Law. Today I'm talking with Carilyn Ibsen, one of our attorneys here, and she recently settled a wrongful death case. And these are difficult cases. These are actually some of the hardest cases I think we as attorneys have to work on. Carrie, tell me a little bit about this particular case.
Yes, in this situation, the family contacted our office after an absolutely horrible, horrific accident. Their daughter, who was in her mid-30s, was driving home and another car crossed the center divider and hit her head on. She passed at the scene. The family contacted us really not knowing what to do. There was a criminal investigation already involved and that was going forward, but they needed to talk to someone else, and that's when they contacted us.
And I think, like you say, these are difficult cases, and talking to the client, and these contact you and just said, what do we need to do, right? That's what the clients asked. What
do we need to do? Or sometimes they're in such emotional distress and they're grieving. They just say, can you handle this? We don't know what to do. And a lot of times they don't really want, at that point, they don't really want us to tell them what we're going to do. They just want us to handle it. And it's important that you gain their trust as a family and respect their grieving process and say, we're going to do what we can to hold this person accountable on the civil side while the criminal investigation and that case moves forward. And as the case progresses, then they start to open up to you a little bit more and talk to you about what's going on and what's going to happen and what should they do, if anything. And my goal as the attorney is for them not to do anything but stay with their family.
And in this particular case, I know we talked about it. Initially, there were some problems with the insurance. We didn't think there was very much insurance at all. What happened there?
Well, we kept investigating, and the initial information we got was a very small amount, not just very small. We're talking below $100,000. But we then found two supplemental policies that put this recovery at over $1 million. Excuse me, over $500,000.
And the extra insurance we found, was that through an uninsured motorist policy that the person had themselves, or was it through an extra liability carrier out there?
No, it was through an underinsured policy that her parents had because she was living with her parents at the time, and we used an underinsured policy to gain additional recovery. Then we used a residential homeowners policy.
And I think, as terrible as this is, I mean, absent those two policies, the recovery would have been very, very small and would have left, I mean, not that money is ever the issue, but it would have been much worse, is what I would say, financially, at least for the family. Is that right?
Correct. And again, it's not about the money. When you talk to a family that's going through this, it's hard to talk about numbers and saying, this is what this person's life was worth. But there's also, when you present that low number, there's anger involved because they're like, right, that's all. And so it's our job to do what we can to try and find an additional policy to give them some, not just comfort, but know that this person was held accountable to what they did.
Yeah, and that's what we found. What I found is, when it's a minimum policy out there, minimum policy limits, and you talk to people, it's one thing in a regular car accident for them to understand the limits, but it's a totally different thing when there's a death or even an amputation or some catastrophic injury, and to hear that, hey, this person had the minimum policy limits, that's all there is. And then, like you say, there's a ton of anger. People get upset. They just, because it's just a terrible situation, I guess. So it sounds like in this case, you were able to find some additional insurance that we could go after just to make it, I guess, a little more financially okay, as I guess, and it take away some of that sour taste, is what I'll say.
Yes, and we also, the case is, that part of the case is closed, but we also still referred out to another issue that came up. Let me rephrase that. Another issue came up was the person that hit her was not injured, and yet their daughter died, and we want to make sure there's nothing wrong with the car. So that's still going on, that investigation to make sure the airbags were going off correctly. You know, there's always that case to make sure the car that you were in did its job also, because we pay a lot of money for cars and we want to make sure they're safe. So that is still going forward, that part of the case to make on the car to make sure there wasn't a defect there also that could have prevented her from dying.
And so, yeah, and I think that's the critical point, is that there's, you know, the car part or a road defect case or whatever else is out there, but then there's also the liability against the person who caused the accident.
Right.
And like you say, families have a lot of anger, you know, justified. I mean, in all these situations, so part of your job as the attorney is to sort of walk this tightrope, I think, right?
Correct. You walk that tightrope, and as a family, you hope, as a family, they're trying to find peace and they're trying to mourn the loss of their daughter. But my job as an attorney also is to help them find peace to the extent that my job allows me to. And the question is, well, why did that person not die and my daughter did? And so I have to look at it as an attorney and say, okay, have we done everything in our power to make sure that nothing could have prevented her from dying? And if that's, you know, looking at the car and making sure there wasn't a design defect, that's what we do. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter the amount of money that you're going to get a family. It will never bring back that person, but you want to help them hopefully find some peace that they can get up in the morning and get through their day.
Yep. And I think that piece is what's lacking when you have just a minimum policy. You know, I mean, it's everybody that's what the life is worth, and that's what they're going to pay. You know, it doesn't do anything to get rid of any of that anger, I guess is what I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, it's not just about money. I mean, it's clearly not at all, but it's hard to explain, but without that, then it's even worse, I guess is what I'll say.
Yeah. And in this case too, I was able to help answer some of their questions regarding the criminal part. I'm not involved in that case, but I made phone calls to the district attorney, letting them know they could talk to the family, help the family know they had rights also with that case, and make sure they knew that as a victim's family, they had a right to be heard in that case also. And that's important too.
It is, and that's sort of an unsung or you know, part of it that people don't talk about a lot is helping walk them through any criminal investigation that's going against the bad guy or the person who caused the accident over there. There's a lot of times, if you're lucky, you've got a great victim witness liaison, but if you don't have that, sometimes it's just you talking to a busy DA who's got a bunch of other files, or you know, or just doesn't have a lot of time to talk to you and hear your story if you're not real careful.
Correct. And the DA's office, you know, as a former district attorney, I understand how heavy those caseloads are, and I want to make sure that my client, even now that I was DA many years ago, understands they have rights. And when I handled these cases as a DA, the one simple thing that they could do for a family is the day of those hearings, I'd ask for a small photo of the deceased victim, and I would take it down couple floors to our blow up guy who worked in the lab. And I made that picture as big as it could. And every day that court had a hearing, I had that picture there. And that simple thing for a family meant a lot, that their child's face was in the courtroom. And so I told this family that. I said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to take a picture, and I want you to tell the DA you want this blown up. And if you really want it done, go do it yourself and hand it over.
Yeah.
And that, I think, helped them.
I think so, as you know, as much as it can. Well, it sounds like you got as good a resolution in this case as you could. What did you learn from this, or what did you take away from it to help other people?
As an attorney now, doing this for as long as I've done it, you can be a great attorney and you can do everything, but you have to still listen to your family. And sometimes just staying on the phone with them for an extended period of time and answering their questions over and over, and just trying to be there for them, because it's a very horrible time, and listening to them and letting them know you're doing everything you can. Sometimes it's not just about filing the right motion, sending the right letter. It's still about just listening to people.
I'd have to agree with all of that. Carrie, we talked about a couple of things that the family wanted to do with these funds after they recover them. What were some of those?
Well, they were actually at a little bit of a loss what to do because they said to me, what do we do with this money? The parents were retired. They were in their late 60s. They owned a home. They really didn't need money. And they said,
Right.
we don't even know what we're going to do with this. And early on in the case, they told me an interesting story about their daughter, that she would travel throughout the United States. She was single and never married. And she would rent a car. And one time she went out to this one location and she put 12,000 miles on a car during a vacation.
Holy
And
cow.
they didn't even, I may be off with that number, but it was in the thousands of how many miles she drove this car. And so her father one day on one of our phone calls was telling me about all these places she had been. And I said to him later on in the case, I said, you should take this money and you and your wife should go to all the places that she loved and see them. And she went out to California. She went to the Rocky Mountains. She went all these places. And I just said, you should take this money and visit all the places she loved.
Yeah, that sounds like a great sort of memorial for her.
Yeah. I just remember her dad, and her dad said they didn't believe it when she handed the rent-a-car in and they saw how many miles she put on that car, because she took a time off work and she just drove across the country. I'm not sure. It was a lot of mileage, but
I wouldn't believe it either. That sounds crazy, but undoubtedly she'd love to travel and see our country.
Yeah, she did. She loved just roaming the country, and she would spend all of her vacation just running a car and doing that.
Hey, this is Shane from Shane Smith Law, talking about our client victories here at Shane Smith Law. Stay tuned for more. Hit like and subscribe down below so you see all of our updates. And remember, if you're in pain, call Shane, 980-999-9999.
In pain, call Shane.
980-999-9999. 980-999-9999. Shane Smith Law. In pain, call Shane.